friends, and welcome to All By Myself. I'm Miss Rachel, and it's so nice to see you. Today's panel is Taking Action, Fighting for What You Believe in. 6 incredible young adult authors are here to talk to you today about their main characters who take action to fight for themselves, to fight for their families, to fight for their friends, or to just fight for a better world. Those authors are Misa Sugiura, Natalia Sylvester, Amelia Diane Coombs, Lough, I W Gregorio. Those authors are Misa Sugiura, Natalia Sylvester, Amelia Diane Coombs, Olivia Hinebaugh, Lough, and I W Gregorio. If you're a Glenside patron, make sure you click the link in the description marked Glenside. That will bring you to a page telling you all about the different books that you can check out now or put on hold as ebooks. If you're more of a hard copy person, you can click on the form, fill it out, and tell me exactly which books you'd like to put on hold when the library is able to reopen. Enjoy this panel. Welcome to our Taking Action panel. I'm going to start by having all of our lovely panelists introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about their books. And anybody can start.
Okay, I'll go. So my name is Misa Sugiura, and I have written 2 books so far. The first one, right here, it's called It's Not Like It's a Secret. And it's about, I'll just keep it up, I guess, while I'm talking, a Japanese American girl with immigrant parents who comes to terms with her sexuality and her identity as an Asian American. And it's about, as the title implies, all the unspoken things, family secrets, personal secrets, unexamined attitudes, and about all kinds of things. The book I'm really mostly going to be talking about is called This Time Will Be Different. And it's about a 4th generation Japanese American girl her name is CJ, and she's sort of drifting through life. And the only place she feels comfortable is her family's flower shop, which is failing. And her mother, and that collides with her mother's ambition. Her mother wants to sell it, and with collides with that and the Japanese American internment and that legacy. And it's kind of about how we deal with past harms and past injustices, how we move forward, and that's that.
So I'm Lough, and I'm mostly going to be talking about I have other 2 books out, but my 3rd book, my 3rd book, Open Fire, and it's about a 17-year-old girl named Katya who during 1917 in Leningrad decides to join the Women's Battalion of Death and fight at the front in the 1st All-Women's Battalion on the Eastern Front. So it's about loyalty and family and friendship, and also figuring out sort of where are you when the world starts ripping itself apart, where do you stand? And how do you figure that out? You haven't quite figured yourself out yet. That's it. I mean, there's more, but that's all I'm gonna say.
All right. I can go. I'm Olivia Hinebaugh. I feel like I hear myself echoing. And I wrote The Birds, the Bees, and You and Me, of which I have a large poster.
Oh, that's wonderful.
I also have a paperback copy right here, which I like because all the little pins on the front, some of them are bigger, and I love a good sassy peach. My book is about a girl, Lacey, who has grown up with a single mom who was a teenage mom. And even though Lacey herself hasn't been kissed and has no sexual experience, she begins to give safer sex advice to all of her peers. And her school is an abstinence-only education school, so it's a little bit, subversive for her to be doing that and handing out condoms to her classmates and all that stuff.
I'm I W Gregorio. You can call me Eileen though. But please don't come up to me at a conference and say, hello, IW, because that just makes me feel awkward. But I'm here to talk about my second book. This is My Brain in Love, which my publisher likes to pitch as a mostly happy book about mental illness. And so it's mostly informed by my own experience growing up with undiagnosed anxiety and depression in an immigrant family. But I think it's more than that. It's not just about mental health and navigating that. It's also approximately the story of two kids of color who are falling in love and having to navigate dealing with one of my main characters' family's failed restaurant. And so it's about, at this point, I like to pitch it as something that's about kids dealing with anxiety, with financial stress, and just trying to discover how to create resilience out of hard times.
Go next. My name is Natalia Sylvester. First of all, I'm really excited to be here. Thank you, Rachel, for bringing us all together. And I love this topic. I'm just excited that we'll have a chance to delve into it. I'm the author of 2 novels for adults, and my third book, which is my YA debut, is Running, and it comes out in July. And Running is a story of 15-year-old Mariana Ruiz, who is a Cuban-American living in Miami, whose father is running for president. So she's always kind of quietly stood by his side and supported him, and suddenly the campaign is bringing all these things to light, and she finds herself realizing that he's not the man she thought he was, and he's not the man she's always supported. And as she's really kind of coming into her own personal and political beliefs, she realizes that they don't actually align. So she has to choose now between, will she just kind of quietly keep supporting her father, or will she take action and speak up and really kind of step into her own and claim her own power? So I really it's definitely an exploration of power. It's, she learns a lot about privilege as well, and not only as someone who is a young woman of color, but also as someone, we look at power and we kind of think a lot about the way oppression works and how oppression works on marginalized communities, but I also wanted to explore the ways that even within our own communities, we do still have power and different privileges, and just because we are oppressed doesn't mean that we cannot further oppress others who don't have the same privileges as we do. So that is Running.
Hi, my name is Amelia, and my debut young adult novel is Keep My Heart in San Francisco, and I kind of wish that I had like a poster or a stand to put it behind me right now. But it releases in July of this year from Simon Pulse. It's a contemporary romance with a mental health subplot that is Own Voices. It follows my main character, Chuck, as she devises a plan to save her family's failing bowling alley, which is the only thing keeping her in San Francisco, which is the city of her heart.
Amazing. So since the title of this panel is Taking Action, can you talk a little bit about the action that your main characters are taking, and why they choose to do so?
So Katya is the main character in my book, and in Open Fire. And she originally doesn't want to fight in the war because her brother has already been fighting there and her father is already at the front. He's a colonel. And so she's been raised in this military background, and she's been taking care of her brother while he's been home wounded. And then he goes back to war, or he's been recalled back to war. And then they find out later that he has deserted. And that coincides with a bunch of flyers going around saying, hey, there's going to be a women's battalion. Come on, we can shame the men to fight because so many men are deserting. We're going to lose the war. And her best friend, Masha, decides that she's going to join the women's battalion. And Katya decides that, for a couple of reasons, she decides to join. For one, she wants to make her father proud of her and notice her, because she's always been sort of the second and the girl in the family. And then 2, she can't let Masha go alone. She feels like Masha shouldn't be doing this by herself. But then for the third reason is really the one, she's doing it for herself, to prove that she could do something. Not that women can fight in war. For Masha, there are other women in the battalion that joined just for part of the suffrage movement in Russia. But that's not her main reason, because in her mind, why should we even question whether women can fight or not? It should just be a given that they can do this. She does it to sort of find her own way. And also she really wants them to win. She doesn't want Germany to win.
I'll go. I'm always good. Yeah, I'm another person who'll just jump right in. A little bit of historical background. I think a lot of people, everyone kind of knows about the Japanese American internment, but there's another detail that isn't always immediately obvious, which is the fact that the internment forced a lot of Japanese American families to sell like everything they own, their homes, their businesses, their cars, their furniture, at just rock bottom prices, because they had to leave home within, just a few weeks, and they weren't going to be able to take care of these things from the camps, and they didn't know when or if ever they were ever going to come back. So it left things wide open for kind of unscrupulous people to come in and just basically steal these things. So CJ's family lost their flower shop in this way to a family called the McAllisters, who then subsequently went on to make tons and tons of, in the world of the book anyway, make a lot of money and become sort of like pillars of the community. And then after the war, CJ's grandfather is released and works for decades and finally buys back the shop. So it means a lot to the family. And CJ's mother is this ambitious sort of type A model minority person who decides the shop it's losing money, so she decides to sell it to that same family, the McAllisters, and that is what initially spurs CJ to action, because this shop means so much to her. And then she finds out that the McAllisters, that her school is named after the McAllisters, and that the land that the school is built on was actually used to also belong to another Japanese American farmer. And so then she realizes that she needs to take her personal fight much bigger and broader, and it becomes a social justice issue in much broader terms.
So in Running, Maddie ends up really kind of having to confront several different choices, and they're kind of progressive as the story goes. So I think in the very beginning, she's really just her father's scheduled for this big interview for his campaign, and they're going to be shooting it in her home, and she just feels like that's too much of an invasion of her privacy. So she has to choose between, going along with it, reading these pre-written, memorizing these pre-written cue cards that his campaign has prepped for her, or finding a way out of it. And then as she learns more, throughout the book, she learns that her father might be at the center of a public health crisis that is now surfacing in Miami, which is where the book takes place. And so she has to then decide, will she join actual, if you see in the book, because I'm also trying not to give away spoilers, right? But if you see in the book, she has a protest sign. So she has to decide, is she going to join protests against her own father in this very public way, right? And then also, if she does decide that, will she literally use her voice to speak up? Because one of the things that was really important to me was that, Maddie's not just, she's really hesitant throughout a lot of the book. She's not someone who just, is ultimately, is just kind of fearlessly embracing the whole thing. She deals with a lot of fear, and she's afraid of, even in everyday situations, she's afraid of speaking up. So what happens now when this is heightened 800 times, and so it's really, for her, it's it's this journey of really realizing that she does have more power than she thinks, and then the reason that she does that, ultimately, it varies each time, but I think what essentially puts her on that journey is realizing how close to home all of these things that her father set into play are really hitting, and she wants, it goes against so much of what she believes in, and it affects people that she loves. And it really kind of puts it into perspective of like, if this is affecting people that I love, then this is going to also be affecting people that I don't even know. And am I okay with that? So those are the choices that she has to make.
So I think I want to talk about something a little bit different. I mean, first of all, thank you, Rachel, for having this panel topic, just because I think, you know, it's been inspiring as our sort of former young adult that to see teens of this generation being so amazing at taking action. And when I look back at my own experiences with activism, so many of them started with stories that I felt so impassioned about. And so like part of like being an activist is like being able to internalize like something that you feel so strongly about and being able to take action. And so, I mean, in This Is My Brain of Love, there are kind of two forms of activism. One of the ways in which my main characters take action is that they essentially take over the running of this family business, which is sort of one of those businesses run by first-generation immigrants who don't understand what Facebook is, and taking it in a sort of a new modern direction. But I think that the most important action that takes place in the book, is internally within the characters. With it's in it, and the action occurs in their brains as they realize that. And I like to describe anxiety and depression as fake news that your brain creates that limits your ability to do anything, to take action in any area of your life. You know, when I'm depressed, I literally can barely get out of bed. And so it was really important for me in this book to talk about sort of the stages that you need, the early stages of mental illness where you don't even know what's going on. And because I feel like a lot of the narrative surrounding anxiety and depression is, you know, very appropriately focused on death by suicide, because obviously it's like the most dramatic, it's like the most devastating endpoint. But there are all the places in between where you can take action, where you can stop and identify things, and when you can talk about ways in which you can help. And a lot of the things that I discuss in this book are the barriers to taking action to help yourself. And so that was a very long way of saying that, you know, activism seems really external, seems really, you know, out there. But for me, at least, before being able to do that, I had to take action for my own mental health before that.
I love that you brought that up, Eileen, because I think I agree. Like, there's been times that we kind of do have a tendency to talk about it like, here's something you could do, but it's like, no, actually first, like, it's absolutely okay if one day you really can, you know. Yeah. And we all have to take into account what is everyone able to do. Like when we, I addressed this briefly in running, but there's a march that takes place in the book, and you know, as like when I was, you know, when the Women's March happened, I went, and the next day I realized, oh, that's probably going to be the last march I go to. And it wasn't anything to do with, although, well, okay, there's a lot of criticism of the march and all that and whatever. But for me personally, I have a hip condition, and day to day I'm fine. But if I walk for too long without resting, the next day I'm in a lot of pain. And so I realized that I was like, gosh, I really pushed myself too far. And for a long time after, like, you know, when friends would have when there would be other marches or other protests going on, I would really feel very guilty that I wasn't there. And, you know, and it makes me realize, I'm like, why am I feeling guilty when I would not put that judgment on other people? Like, I completely understand that everyone has different, whether it's mental or physical, like, just completely, they have to know what, you know, it's important to know the things we can do, but also what we can't, and say, these are my boundaries, and work within that space.
I actually needed to hear what you just said, Eileen, well, also Natalia, but because just for me personally, I struggle with that myself, and then the guilt trip, you know, of productivity and not being, especially right now, not being productive enough. You know, with my kids, I've got 2 special need kids, and they're both home right now, and I have to get them to do schoolwork, and I've also got to write, and I've also teach a class, and like, I'm not getting anywhere. I'm like spinning and spinning and spinning, and then I just beat myself up about it. So it's nice to hear, I mean, just to think back that I need to get my sort of Maslow's hierarchy of needs for myself going before I can do other stuff. Also, my book has a women's march in it too. Like the first one.
That's awesome. I'm actually, so of course I don't like being quarantined at home, but in talking about mental health, I deal with agoraphobia. And in a lot of ways, I'm so happy that people are taking some things to Zoom. I know, Rachel, you're like, maybe I don't want to keep doing this. But I think that's really something. I love doing book events. That's my favorite part of being an author, but I have to, it's a huge energy expenditure for me. And so I feel the same way, that I have to take care of myself, and I try to support people the way that I can, but it's not always showing up in person for people. Yeah, I can talk about my book. That's okay.
Please do.
Okay, so Lacey starts to give sex ed advice to her classmates for kind of two reasons. The first is that a classmate of hers that sort of dropped off the face of the earth, she finds out is actually pregnant and felt a lot of shame about that, so pulled out of school and is homeschooling. And since Lacey's mom was a teenage parent and is now a labor and delivery nurse, Lacey sort of knows, you know, how that would be to maybe be pregnant and be a teenager and, you know, feel embarrassed about something that she sees as like a preventable thing. So that character's like, I know you know all about this. You probably think it's stupid that I got pregnant. And she comes from a non-judgmental place, but she also wants to help other, you know, kids and especially girls not wind up in the same position. And actually the scene in the book where she first sort of makes a splash is a sex ed class where, I don't know, I polled a lot of people about sort of the negative sex ed experiences they had had. And this is based on a lecture that somebody had where the teacher had like a series of glasses of water, and one of them had blue food coloring in it. And then she would like mix the water up and put it down and mix the water up. And by the end, they're all like blue. And she was like, okay, this is what happens when you exchange bodily fluids with people. You all have the same STI. And Lacey's immediate like rebuttal to that was like, what if you put a condom over the top of the cup? So that's actually what she does. She finds a condom and she walks up and she puts the condom on the cup, and that's like her very first taking action, whereas before she's kind of been a wallflower. But I think it's kind of similar where she's grown up in like a really supportive environment, and she doesn't necessarily feel like she needs to go against the grain in a lot of ways. It's not exactly rebelling because she knows she has the support of her parents and her friends. But it's the first time she's had to do stuff where she realizes not everybody's going to be happy with her. And I think that's something that's especially for girls and probably a lot of teens, it's hard to do stuff where you know you might ruffle feathers. And it's something I struggle with. So I'm always happy to have characters that ruffle feathers.
All right, I'll go next or last. So Chuck takes like a bunch of different actions throughout the book. She's a pretty active main character, which is kind of why I love her. It's been fun. But when she kind of discovers that Big Mouth Bowl, which is her family's bowling alley, is behind on like $8,000 rent, and her dad is just like totally cool with it closing, she knows she needs to do something. And the main barrier is finances. So she's like, I'm going to find a way to earn $8,000 in a week. Just an excellent starting point. And she tries a couple of different plans, like she loves vintage clothes and has a bunch of clothes that she tries to sell. Doesn't really go very well. She doesn't make a lot of money. And so her former best friend, Beckett, approaches her, and they haven't talked in a year. And he has a plan where they can kind of like gamble their way to $8,000. And but in order for Chuck to get to that point, she has to actually talk to Beckett. And they had this huge fight the year prior, actually, over kind of like mental health and stigma that happened at a party. And so she's had a lot of like barriers up, and she's kind of been like forbidding for like a year. Like she hasn't really spoken to him. She hasn't had a lot of social interactions. It's been really hard on her at school dealing with stigma around her mental health. And she kind of blames Beckett for that to like kind of start. So like the biggest action that she takes in the beginning is reconnecting with him. And she kind of has to realize that she might have also had a like role in what happened the year prior in the fight, and also she has to learn how to like forgive him and herself for what happened in the past. And then also in the end, she takes some additional action to get help for her mental health problems, and has like a little road to recovery and acceptance there.
I was really excited when I was putting this panel together because I knew we had a couple books that were dealing directly with mental health, and all books deal with mental health in one way or another, but confronting it head on. And so I'm really glad that everyone touched on that, because that was exactly what I was hoping for. So one of the reasons that characters take action, and just people in general take action, is because of people around them, whether it's because they're feeling compassion for somebody else and empathy, or they're really angry at something that somebody else is doing. So in terms of your supporting characters, who are some of the supporting characters that help lead your main character to take action, and how did you develop them? Like, did they always have the role that they have now in the finished product as you were drafting, or did that sort of evolve?
I feel like I kind of already touched on mine, especially because the main character's mom is actually such a big supportive character in mine. I think it's kind of, the mom's almost like embarrassing. Like, I always think of the Mean Girls scene where she's like, "Do you need anything? Condoms?" You know, like that's her mom. So except, you know, maybe like less hip and more actually with it. But also my character Lacey has two best friends, Theo and Evita, who are just 100% supportive of what she does, and they actually think she's a badass, and I don't think she sees that about her own self at all. So having that acknowledged by her friends and supported, and she also feels a little self-conscious that she herself does not have any sexual experience. So she's like, why would anyone, you know, want to listen to me? I don't have any experience. But, you know, she's surrounded by people who say, like, that does not matter. What matters is you have the information that can help other people. And also, you know, spoiler, it is kind of a romance. So, you know, by the end, she does have some sexual experiences. So I think it's equally as much about that. And yeah, she gets together with her best friend, Theo. And one of the things I'm really proud of in the book is even when things are like fumbling and awkward, she's always felt so comfortable with him and talking about sex, even though it's not exactly her personal wheelhouse, that yeah, she feels supported in talking about things, in giving consent to things that she wants to do, asking for, you know, the thing. And I think, you know, that's a really great thing if you find somebody for your first sexual experiences who are like supportive and kind and care about you. It's kind of an ideal situation. So yeah, that's pretty much it.
So Masha is her best friend, and Masha decides that she hears about the Women's Battalion of Death and hears that there is a rally at the Mariinsky Theater in Leningrad. I'm sorry, it wasn't Leningrad, Petrograd. I should know this. And so she convinces Katya to go. And when Katya is there, she sort of gets that feeling that she's finally with people that she belongs with, and she understands the other women. And even though she's completely intimidated by them, she understands what they are standing for. And so she really heavily influenced Katya. I think that's what the question was about, was the influence. Yeah, okay. And then of course her background with her father and growing up with an older brother who was sort of trained to follow in the father's footstep and sort of always following him along and getting help from his friends on some military training, sort of as the little kid sister thing. That also influenced her. But another thing that she gets into is a little bit of Bolshevism. So the book starts at the beginning of the February Revolution, which began with the women marching against the Tsar's rationing the bread. And that's what began the revolution in Russia in 1917. So she has a hard time deciding where she falls on the, does she personally support the traditional roles and the Tsar like her father, or does she agree with the socialists? And she has a friend who is a socialist, who is a Bolshevik, who gets her to help them a little bit as a messenger, as a courier. And so she gets to see both sides and sort of make her decision throughout the course of the book. But it's a really hard decision for her because, again, loyalty to family, loyalty to country, and even loyalty to herself.
In my book, CJ has a number of, I do a lot of like, my books have many characters in them. So in this particular book, CJ, so initially her main support is her aunt Hannah, who runs the flower shop and who is really passionate about the family connection to it and its value in the world in terms of like helping bring beauty to the world and helping connect people. So she needs CJ's support in helping to keep that flower shop going. And also she's the one who backs CJ up against her own mom, against her mom, saying like, it's okay not to know what you want to do for your future. It's okay not to be this sort of, not to have like a vision for your life and stuff. And then there's this boy, and she has her best friend who's always there, but and then there's Owen, who's her history nerd from school, who works at the flower shop, and he's kind of instrumental in helping CJ get that initial like school renaming protest movement off the ground. And I think his what I love about him is that he keeps her honest. He calls her out on when she's motivated by sort of selfish and petty reasons versus kind of the bigger picture. And I think another important ally for CJ is, I discuss allyship in the book, and there's this girl, Bryn, who's sort of like her frenemy, for a lot of reasons, but Bryn is an activist. She's like a school leader and she wants to help out, and she does a lot to try to publicize the movement, but it starts becoming a white savior. It creeps into the area of white saviorism. And I wasn't sure that was where I was going to go with her in the beginning, but that is where I went. And it was a great opportunity to sort of examine our desires to help. Like, where is the line between being an ally and sort of taking over, and when to take a back seat, and how to handle calling out that kind of behavior. So sometimes your enemies can be your friends, and sometimes your friends are not, or your allies are not quite the allies that you want them to be. Was my point, I guess.
It's a really great point. And I don't really have anything like that in my book, but my book is probably more similar to I think it was Olivia who was talking about how the importance that family plays on how you react to stress and like how you respond. And unlike her parents, who I guess were really good role models, like if there isn't really any single real villain in my book except for their own brains and like their anxiety and depression. But the closest thing to it would be my character Jocelyn's father, which is one of the most difficult characters to write, because it was really challenging to make him other than the stereotypical overbearing Asian American parents, who has ridiculous expectations for their children, and but who don't have the cultural context to understand what they're doing. And I think that one of the things that was important for me to bring out in that character is that even though he's an immigrant himself, even though he's been the subject of targeted racism and anti-immigration sentiment, he has his own bigotries, particularly in relationship to the other character, my other point of view character, Will, who's mixed race Black, Nigerian. And so when it comes to being a villain in that aspect, like it was important for me to put that in, but at the same time to give the reader a little sense of compassion for him, that a lot of his bigotries come from the context of a very different, way of growing up. And because in activism can be at its most effective. A lot of people think that activism is at its most effective when you're like completely black and white about an issue. Like you're like, this is so completely wrong, and you feel so passionate about it that you'll do anything to like sacrifice anything to be able to fight for it. But one of the things I've sort of found in my own activism, is really has taken in the form of activism for intersex youth. Is in that fight, the fight that intersex youth are playing for their bodily autonomy, they're ostensibly fighting against doctors. The medical profession that historically has like really tried to change intersex bodies. And intersex is a biological condition where you're neither male nor female, but something in between, where either your biology or chromosomes don't completely line up. But what I learned in that fight, in the actual activism that I do in advocacy for intersex kids, is that you have to have compassion for these evil empires, or these, the villains in your story, because that's the most effective way to make change, to build bridges. And that's something that I still struggle with in daily life. But like in this case, even though the father's ostensibly the villain, in the end, the family, the characters only win when they're able to overcome their differences and change each other.
I do love that about you. I love your dad in your book. He's so it's that thing of like the villain is actually an ally in disguise.
Yeah.
If just sort of scratch beneath the surface, and you see so much else going on in that character. Those are my favorite kinds of characters.
I also love your Instagram posts with your masks and like your sexy doctor looks.
Yeah. I'm gonna start bringing those back. I think I'm running out of content, so masks are in style now. So like, what better time to bring it back?
I don't. Oh, okay. I guess I haven't gone yet. I really love this question because for me, I had the most fun writing Maddie's friends. And specifically, there's this group in Maddie's school who really, to a certain point, she's only known through the lens of her father, who kind of just calls them like these malcriados troublemakers, like, because they have like the audacity to like speak up and, be activists and form a protest club. And so through the course of the book, she ends up, befriending them and realizing that they're not what she thought they were. And it was really important for me because Maddie is someone who's just starting in her journey to activism. She doesn't get everything right the first time. She doesn't know everything. But she surrounds herself eventually with people who she can learn from, and who are, even though at times like not like everyone's an individual. So some people meet her with a little more friendliness than others, but she's allowed to make mistakes. And so so it was just, I don't know, it was really fun for me to write them. Their names are Casey, Didier, and Jackie. But another person who really helps out Maddie is surprisingly in her own family. And I won't mention too much more in that, but it's kind of going back to Eileen, what you were saying is that's like, we sometimes do have unexpected allies, and like people who you think are villains, and maybe they have like a far more rich, a richer backstory than we think. So.
All right. So Chuck is kind of pushed toward action due to her dad initially, because she overhears a conversation between him and their landlord. And that's when she kind of knows that they're in trouble. He refuses to tell her what's going on. And so she feels very in the dark and decides to take action. But the one thing I do focus on a lot is that her actions are extremely selfish, and she's really doing it because that's what she wants. She wants to stay where she is. She's extremely stubborn as a main character. She wants to stay in San Francisco, and so she's going to find any way, literally, to do that. But the dad has pretty much always played that role, that kind of like inciting incident. Another person who helps her act is Beckett, and he did not always used to play that role. In earlier drafts, he was actually kind of like antagonistic toward Chuck, and they had a very different relationship. In revisions, I kind of like fleshed out their best friend backstory, and never really used to be that way, and I think it's so much better, and that is like the power of revision. And the other thing I want to touch on is like what's equally important is why Chuck doesn't act in certain ways. So when it comes to mental health, she is very avoidant and very kind of in denial, and that is due to her mom, who did not deal well with her mental health struggles. And so she's very much leaning into that fear and that stigma of avoid, and like, so she's going to avoid basically and not act and not get help for herself.
So do y'all have any favorite characters from other media? So other books, TV shows, movies, etc., that take action in some way or another, whether it's standing up for others, standing up for themselves, standing up for a family business, stuff like that.
I'll go. I love Jo Kwon in Stacey Lee's The Downstairs Girl. She's so, yeah, and she's literally an underground activist, you know, because she writes this advice column anonymously from this basement hidden under the home of the guy who runs the newspaper. And you know, she's sort of like this, and it takes place during the Reconstruction, right? It's historical fiction. And so she's got this sort of decidedly progressive feminist viewpoint. Yeah, Stacey's characters are all active, very active, and so I love that about all of them. But in particular, Jo is pretty awesome, and I know it's not the main point of the movie, but I love Cher and Clueless, and when she finally like decides to make over her soul and become a better person, and like she like captains the donation drive for the Pismo Beach disaster, and she's like, you know, bringing caviar and like skis and things, like totally misguided, but very good-hearted, and that's, yeah, I love that about her.
Oh my God, I love that you mentioned her. You just gave me an idea for someone else too.
I just watched that movie with my 13-year-old daughter, and you know, that movie came out when I was a teenager, so it was quite a time trip for me.
I'm gonna have to revisit it as well. My daughter's a tween, and like we're already at the point where everything mommy does is cringe, and I'm like, oh my gosh, Olivia, we're gonna expand your vocabulary. So I'm trying to watch this movie.
The one character I thought, and this is silly, but I was just always thinking about Buffy from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, because like she takes all the action and like saves the world from the apocalypse. So that's where my mind went right now.
You know, I've never seen that. I've never seen Buffy, and like all of my friends have, but I missed it because I was living overseas for a really long time, and then like, you know, it just, I missed it. But I know, like, I just know intrinsically that I would love that show too. So I agree with you.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk about Mueller from the X-Files because you know, he was really driven. This is really aging myself. He was really driven to find out what happened to his sister Samantha, and so much so that he went into psychology and he joined the FBI. And then when he found out about the X-Files, he reopened the X-Files and started this whole sort of program going on, even though all of his colleagues were criticizing him and thinking he was absolutely bonkers. He really went for it despite all the evidence that he supposedly did or did not find. Another one from fiction, from YA fiction, is Rose in Rose Under Fire by Elizabeth Bean. Most people think of Codename Verity, which I do like that. I do love that book. But Rose Under Fire was one of those ones where it was one of those uncomfortable historical fiction novels because it really sits with you. It takes you a long time. And I read it right before I moved to Germany. So when I first got here, I was sort of in that mindset of being in the concentration camp that Rose was in. She was an American, so she was in a women's political concentration camp. So what she does I think she was sort of an activist in the concentration camp, was that she, as the only American woman, she had some privilege, of course. She wasn't treated, at first, she wasn't treated exactly like the Polish girls, because the Germans were looking down on the Polish girls a little bit more than they sort of were in awe of the American prisoner, because she was a pilot and an American, and the only woman American that they had. But she really went to fight for, like, sort of undermining the camp in a way to help support the medical experiments that they were doing on the Polish girls in Ravensburg. So I think even though she wasn't, going rah, rah, rah all the time, she was sort of under the table helping these other women, these other girls during this time in World War II. But I really like that book.
I have a historical one also. I just finished, it's actually middle grade, The Blackbird Girls by Anne Blankman. And I can't say enough stuff about this. I mean, I kind of know Anne just a little bit, but as soon as I finished the book, I had to send her an email because it meant so much to me, because it's about these two girls that really don't like each other at all, but they're in Pripyat and when Chernobyl happens. So they kind of get forced together because the one girl's mom has too high of radiation to get on the bus with them and all this stuff. But both of the girls take huge, both like internal action and external action. Whereas, one of the girls is Jewish and the other one, like, basically is told she can't be friends with her. So there's that, and they have to sort of contend with, this is not at all how I heard Jews were, and they're so friendly. So there's a lot of that sort of like, inner makeover, accepting each other, but then they also do things to help each other and to stay alive and to find a safe place in a world that's really uncertain. And I just really loved it. And I think it's like one of those books that I would hand to just about anyone. It's middle grade, but I'm like, I read it in one day and I just couldn't put it down, and it meant a lot. So I'm like, every kid and adult I meet, I'm like, here, you should read this one.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because I didn't know about it. And I have a Jewish friend who was in Ukraine when Chernobyl went off and she was evacuated. And I met her when I was studying Russian in college. So like, it's like kind of,
You have to give her the
that book right now. Yeah.
I'd love to read that. One of the books that came to me and that I have right here is Patron Saints of Nothing by Randy Ribe. And it's a story of a Filipino-American boy who ends up taking a quest to uncover the disappearance of his Filipino cousin who disappeared during the drug wars in the Philippines under Duterte. And I love this book so much because it uncovered a piece of history, a piece of current history that I feel like so many people don't discover. It's a really lyrical, powerful book, and it's a little bit of a mystery, but it's also like incredibly character driven. And again, this kid taking action, he's like, no one's mourning this cousin, someone has to hold the torch for him and keep his memory alive.
I thought of Mark Oshiro's Anger is a Gift, and the main character, Moss Jeffries, and who is someone who is, going through a lot of trauma and grief and anxiety because his father was killed by the police. And it's hard to talk about the book without giving too much away, but essentially he has to make a choice, because his father was also an activist, and he eventually has to choose, will he step back into that, even though it's and other events also that are incredibly traumatizing and difficult occur in the book. And so, I just really love that that the book addresses the things like we've been talking about before, but his anxiety and also all the trauma that he's dealing with. And that's like, we're not always just jumping into action in these ideal circumstances. And And so I love that about that book. And then I'm thinking of shows, and it's like, can I count Xena? Because growing up with Xena, I just think of what a powerful like role model for it's okay if you're a woman and you're angry, you know, and you're powerful and you're out there fighting, you know. So that was someone else I thought I'd mention.
Xena and Buffy, man.
Yeah.
I did see
Funny,
Xena.
you've all gone like paranormal for or sci-fi. I don't know what the X-Files counts as. But.
Well, I think it counts as paranormal. I mean, urban fantasy. No.
Mm-hmm.
Do you all have any advice for teens who want to fight for what they believe in, or maybe want to speak up for themselves and what they need, but aren't quite sure how to do that yet? Like beginning steps.
So I even took notes on what I wanted to say because I had a lot of thoughts. I'll try to be quick though. So I think the first thing on like a personal level is I think anybody, if they start to really look for the things that are strengths of theirs, you can always build and build and build and build. And so I think knowing the ways that you personally would take action and make change and make life better for, you know, anybody. But the second thing is I feel like in the last few years, we really have seen that teens can make a huge difference. And so my biggest piece of advice was definitely like, don't accept anybody who says you don't know enough, or you don't have enough experience, for two reasons. One, because if kids and teens are not the people who have the most vested interest in our future, then I don't know who does. They're going to be on the planet probably longer than us. So they know they're doing things for themselves and for their peers. But the other thing is, any actual supportive adult is not going to tell you you don't know enough or that you're not strong enough. What they are going to do is they're going to teach you the things that they know and share the advice of how they feel empowered to act. So it's like, look out for those adults and those people that bring that out in you. And then the other two is just like, stay curious about everything. Because you just never know what's coming. And if you start to sort of stay curious about other people's experiences and also about learning new things, like, you really are in a place to make an impact. And the very last thing is just to think about the scale you want to act on, and that it's not, bigger scale does not equal better or more important. Yeah, going to like marches and stuff is great. But being a listening ear to a friend who's having a tough time is really impactful. So those are my pieces of advice.
Okay, fine. So I think one thing to think about is that it's okay to make mistakes or trip as you go along with your mission, whatever your mission is that you feel, and also just deciding on where you stand. Sometimes it's okay for things to feel gray. It doesn't have to be black and white. There is sometimes there are nuances. I mean, there are some things, of course, that are absolutes, but for a lot of things, it's okay to be unsure and eventually things will come clear to you. And it's okay to be in that place where you don't know the answers yet. And if you can listen to your heart, of course, do that. But sometimes even that is difficult to do when all the noises coming in from the outside are very loud.
Absolutely. I mean, all of your points are so excellent. I mean, the one, I mean, I go back to that song from Into the Woods, which is No One Is Alone, which is number one for you. If you are interested in being an activist, remember that there are going to be people on your side, and seek out those people, you know, whether it be online or in person, or like, you know, there are going to be people who building coalitions is key to, it's like the lever with which you can really change the world. And we saw that with the children's book industry, with We Need Diverse Books, you know, where a simple Twitter hashtag led to significant change in the industry. But realize that, like, the premise of No One Isn't Alone, the song and Into the Woods, is that the other people aren't alone either. And so there are going to be, and the hardest thing sometimes about activism is feeling like you're in a fight. Like there are going to be people out there who disagree with what you say and dislike you. And that's, to me, was one of the hardest things about being an activist in any portion of my life, is the concern that I'm like somehow being an antagonist, that like I'm the villain to them. And the solution to that, I found, is to just have compassion for them. Do as much as you can to understand their point of view, so that you can slowly, subversively begin to, erode the foundations of their resistance to what you're doing. And it can be really hard. Like some of the most challenging parts of my life in the past few years are when I felt like I alienated a friend by sticking to my guns, or felt like I've been the villain. And that is going to probably happen if you're going to be an activist. But remember that, in those times, though, that taking the role of becoming a villain, that's like your sacrifice for the movement, because it's not easy, but it is necessary sometimes to be the heavy. And every movement has different, approaches, and like people who are like the good cop and the bad cop. And, nothing that you do in that way is irreparable. Like, I've burned some bridges, but then been able to rebuild them.
I think the thing I would have wanted to know when I was younger was that it's okay to be fearful, that fearlessness is not the goal. You can actually turn your fear into something. Sometimes fear is the thing that tells you you're on the precipice of something, of some big change, because things are always scary in the anticipation of, like in those moments before you've done something, and then once you start doing them, you realize that other parts of you are taking over. And so I would say, see how you can use your fear. Don't feel like you have to ignore it, but really question it. Like, where's it coming from? Interrogate it, right? And then the other thing I would say is, like, surround yourself with people who will inspire and empower you, but also know that you might be that person for somebody else. So you can draw strength from both sides of that, from the people who are like, who you kind of hope to be like maybe, but then also there's somebody else watching you probably and looking up to you and learning from your own actions, and maybe like take strength in knowing that that all of our actions are really connected.
Okay, everyone's so wise. I'm like, trying to think of something. But I think one thing maybe is that baby steps are okay. Like, we're not all going to be Greta Thunberg, who also has, people supporting her behind the scenes. We're not all going to, you don't need to be the face of something right away. You don't need to like lead the charge right away. Maybe start by, if you need to, start small. And then once you, just that one action can, like one small success will give you the confidence maybe to do something a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger. Or, maybe it's just a lifetime of small contributions, and that's okay. Like, do what you can.
First, I want to say I don't recommend that teens do like anything that happens in my book to exact change, because she breaks a lot of laws. But on like a general note, to not stand in your own way, and also to, like other people have said, find like-minded people in community who believe in the same thing that you do, and also to stay away from the people who make you feel small.
Those are all so lovely. And I'm very excited that teens now get to grow up with all of your books and all of the amazing literature we've got right now that I feel like is so inspiring and escape. It lets them have an escape, but it also relates to real real life. And I want to thank you all so much for taking time out of your day to be on this panel. It was absolutely wonderful. So.
Thank you, Rachel.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was so nice to
Thank
meet
you, everybody.
Hey y'all, thanks so much for tuning into this panel. If you're looking for more panels like it, make sure you check out the All the